Several false ideas about Neanderthals are spread by many people. One of them is that they were stupid and rude, which is not true. Because this false idea has been around for so long, we now use the word Neanderthal to refer to someone who is not educated or smart. He was almost given the name Homo Stupidus, which means the stupid man. We now know that Neanderthals were just as smart as people. That's not the only interesting thing we know about the Neanderthals, though. We'll cover some of the cool things we found. They were smarter than you think. They painted caves before we even got to Europe. They crafted tools, buried their dead, and maybe, just maybe, they whispered words in a language long forgotten. They walked upright. Neanderthals have frequently been portrayed as slouched animals with stooped backs, almost as if they were some other type of big ape. This portrayal has been prevalent throughout history, but it is not accurate. Neanderthals walked upright and may have had a posture that was superior to that of modern humans. Marcelin Boule, who believed that Neanderthals were the missing link between humans and other great apes, was the one who first began the myth of the slumped Neanderthal. Following the creation of a computer model of a Neanderthal skeleton, researchers came to the conclusion that Neanderthals walked in an upright position. They observed that the lower spine and the neck were curved. In both cases, an upright posture is indicated. It was initially believed that Neanderthals walked with a hunch, but it was later discovered that their necks and spines were not always straight. The researchers also noticed that the wear marks on the hips of the skeleton showed that the individual had an upright posture. The position of the sacrum, which is the bone located between the hip bones, was exactly the same as it is with Homo sapiens. In order for this to have been possible, they needed to have maintained an upright posture. Non-Africans have Neanderthal genes. About 70,000 years ago, early Homo sapiens left Africa. The Neanderthals and the Denisovans were two other species of humans that lived on Earth at the same time as Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens moved toward Eurasia, where they met Neanderthals and had babies with them. Asians and Europeans today have some Neanderthal genes in them because they are descended from these Homo sapiens. Researchers have found that about 2% of the DNA of the average Asian or European person comes from the Neanderthals. Black people in sub-Saharan Africa don't have much or any Neanderthal DNA because their relatives never left Africa and didn't breed with Neanderthals. Because they were all connected, Homo sapiens bred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. Homo heidelbergensis was the ancestor of all three groups. Between 500 and 600,000 years ago, a group of Homo heidelbergensis left Africa. On the way, they split up. The Neanderthals came from the group that went to Western Asia and Europe. The other group went to East Asia and became the Denisovans. The Homo heidelbergensis that stayed in Africa changed over time and became Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens may have eaten Neanderthals. If the theory put forward by Paul Portola and Benvenuto Martinez Navarro is correct, early Homo sapiens may have actually eaten Neanderthals as they moved from Africa into Europe. Anthropologists suggest that humans hunted, butchered, and consumed their ancient cousins. The same view is supported by Fernando Rie, a researcher at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in Paris. After examining a Neanderthal jawbone, he came to this chilling conclusion. The cuts in the bone were clearly made by humans. As if that weren't disturbing enough, early people may have also crafted bracelets out of Neanderthal teeth, but not all experts agree. Some believe that Stone Age humans simply scavenged Neanderthal remains, perhaps taking jawbones or other bones from individuals who had already died of natural causes. Still, if the claims are true, it would back the theory that early humans hunted Neanderthals to extinction. This idea is not without weight. The last Neanderthals disappeared around the same time the first Homo sapiens entered Europe. They painted, the artistic side of Neanderthals. Yes, Neanderthals were artists. They created the oldest known cave paintings in the world, roughly 65,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens ever reached Europe. Neanderthals used red pigments to paint what appears to be a ladder-shaped symbol on a cave wall in Spain. Two more Neanderthal paintings were later discovered in separate caves, both also in Spain. Because Homo sapiens had not yet arrived in Europe, researchers concluded that these artworks must have been created by Neanderthals themselves. The paintings serve as powerful evidence that Neanderthals had cognitive abilities comparable to modern humans. They were almost called Homo Stupidus. In 1856, the first Neanderthal fossil was discovered in the Neander Valley, also known as Neanderthal, in Germany. The valley was named after Joachim Neumann, a German minister from the 1600s who often walked through the region and published hymns under the name Neander, the Greek word for new man. Over time, the names Neander and Toll, which means valley in German, were combined. Later in 1904, the H was dropped from Toll, because modern German no longer includes the TH sound, but in English and other languages, the TH stuck, giving us the form we still use today, Neanderthal. In 1864, the species was officially named Homo neanderthalensis by William King, but just 2 years later, another scientist, Ernst Haeckel, proposed a cruel alternative, Homo Stupidus, or the stupid man. Fortunately, King's name had come first, and stuck. The world got it wrong. It's not surprising Haeckel suggested such a name. At the time, and even well into the 20th century, people believed Neanderthals were dumb, unskilled, and incapable of symbolic thought. But we now know that's false. Neanderthals could draw, they could hunt, they could care for the sick and elderly, they used tools, they buried their dead, they may have even spoken a language. In many ways, Neanderthals were just like us, but there was one problem: inbreeding. One major challenge they faced was genetic. Neanderthals inbred. A lot. Small, isolated populations led to a loss of genetic diversity over time. This may have made them more vulnerable to disease, climate shifts, and ultimately, extinction. Neanderthals often mated with their own kind. In 2014, a Neanderthal toe bone from 120,000 years ago was found in the Alai Mountains in Siberia. The Neanderthal's genome showed that its parents were very closely related. They might have been related by blood, like brothers or first cousins, or they might have been an uncle and his niece. Another 50,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton found in Vindia, Croatia, and 13 more found in Sidron, Spain, backed up the idea that they had been breeding with each other. All of the bones showed that the people were linked to each other. Neanderthals had problems when they bred with other Neanderthals, just like modern people do. The bones and body parts of inbred Neanderthals were not made properly. The kneecaps and vertebrae of many of their skeletons were not shaped correctly. At least one Neanderthal kept a baby tooth until they were an adult. Neanderthals were weaker and less likely to have children than early Homo sapiens because they were breeding with each other. Unfortunately for us, when Neanderthals and early humans bred, they passed on some of these bad genes to us. Even though they've been mostly turned off, the genes are still found in some people today. Some experts think that one reason the Neanderthals died out might have been that they bred with each other too much. They were cannibals. Despite the fact that we do not know whether early Homo sapiens consumed Neanderthals, we do know that Neanderthals consumed Neanderthal bodies. Yes, cannibals were among the Neanderthals. Following an examination of the skeletal remains of 5 Neanderthals that were 40,000 years old, the researchers arrived at this result. The bones were fractured in the same manner as the bones of the animals that the Neanderthals hunted, may have been broken. Uncertainty persists over the reason why Neanderthals consumed the flesh of other Neanderthals to begin with. Neanderthals, early Homo sapiens, and even modern Homo sapiens do not possess a strong nutritional profile. It seems obvious that Neanderthals would have preferred to hunt larger and more nutritious species such as horses, bison, reindeer, and mammoths that roamed in the vicinity. Researchers have hypothesized that Neanderthals consumed the marrow of other Neanderthals in order to obtain their own nutrients. Considering that the bones displayed indications of having been shattered on purpose in order to access the nutrient-rich marrow that was contained within them. This could be the case. Researchers are also of the opinion that the Neanderthals may have turned to cannibalism for cultural reasons, or that they just enjoyed eating neighbouring Neanderthals who wandered into their region. There are 2 possible explanations for this behaviour. They were hunted by other animals. It's likely that Neanderthals spent a lot of their time trying not to get eaten. They were killed by wild animals of the time, as well as by other Neanderthals, and maybe even humans. After looking at some Neanderthal fossils, researchers came to this opinion. They found bite marks on the fossils that were consistent with big meat-eating animals. A young Neanderthal child's fossilized bone made it clear that he had been eaten by a big cat. The bone of another Neanderthal child, found in Poland's Kemna cave, showed that he had been eaten by a big bird. The holes in the bone from 115,000 years ago show that it had been through a bird's digestive system. But experts couldn't say for sure if the bird killed the child or just ate its body. It's not a big surprise that Neanderthals were sometimes found in the bellies of other animals. These animals and Neanderthals lived very close to each other, since they were all trying to get food from the same places and hide in the same caves. Fights were likely to happen often. They buried their dead. In 1908, 2 archaeologists discovered the remains of a Neanderthal that were 50,000 years old. The cave was located in La Chapelle-aux-Saints, which is considered to be in France. At the time, nobody believed the anthropologists when they claimed that the Neanderthal had been purposefully buried there. However, they continued to insist on their claim. 1999 was the year that archaeologists went back to the site. In 2012, a group of researchers from New York University, led by William Rendu, established beyond a reasonable doubt that the Neanderthal was in fact buried at that location. Since then, we have discovered over 20 other sites dispersed over Europe that contain the remains of Neanderthals that were buried underneath the ground. In order to avoid the body from being consumed by scavengers, the burials were frequently performed in a hurry. The fact that burials were found among Neanderthals lends credence to the claim that Neanderthals gave medical attention to their ailing and elderly members of the population. The Neanderthal that was discovered in the cave in France had bone deformations and had misplaced a significant number of teeth. Given their lack of concern for the deceased, it is highly improbable that Neanderthals would have gone to the trouble of burying them. We don't know why they went extinct. We have no idea why the Neanderthals died out. We've already said that inbreeding and killing by Homo sapiens could be reasons, but they are only ideas. Other experts think that Neanderthals died out because early humans brought deadly diseases to them when they came to Europe. Some experts think that only a few Neanderthals lived through the first ice age. During the second ice age, any Neanderthals that were still alive lived with humans. They bred with each other, and soon their genes were mixed with human genes. Neanderthals cared for their comrades with disabilities. A fragment of a Neanderthal child's ear bone suggests she had Down syndrome and that she was cared for by her community. In a study published in June in the journal Science Advances, researchers identified a 6-year-old Neanderthal child nicknamed Tina in a cave in Spain. Tina's ear bone, which dated to between 273,000 and 146,000 years ago, has a shape associated with Down syndrome as well as other abnormalities. Although no genetic work has conclusively shown that Tina had Down syndrome, she nevertheless would have required care from her community to survive. According to the researchers, since her ear bone also suggested she had major hearing loss and vertigo. The findings suggest that other Neanderthals were helping her and her mother out of a sense of altruism. Neanderthals created an early glue factory. As far back as 65,000 years ago, Neanderthals on the Iberian Peninsula were skilled engineers who made sticky tar in a precisely controlled environment. In the December issue of the journal Quaternary Science Reviews, researchers detailed their discovery of a hearth in a cave floor in Gibraltar. The hearth was full of charcoal and plant resin and was likely heated to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, 150 degrees Celsius, to produce the gooey glue which would have been used to fashion weapons such as spears. The findings show Neanderthals were both very intelligent and able to collaborate to produce complex tools. We also learned that modern humans didn't purposely kill off the world's last Neanderthals. In addition to absorbing some of the Neanderthals through interbreeding and gene exchange, humans appear to have simply outcompeted Neanderthals by falling back on our vast social networks when times were tough and leaving our introverted cousins high and dry. So who was the last Neanderthal? Although researchers still don't know for sure, current evidence points to southern Iberia as a potential location for Neanderthals' last stand around 37,000 years ago. After that time, Neanderthals as a distinct group ceased to exist, although they live on in part through the genes they shared with us. We hope you liked this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about.